we welcome to the Masters of Scale stage, Keith Ferrazzi.
You know, the organizations today have not fundamentally changed for 100 years. If you take a look at the first slide that we have here, you can see, once it finally gets there, you can see that an organization chart of IBM 100 years ago is fairly indistinguishable from an organization of a large bank today. The only thing that's fundamentally changed here is that somewhere along the way, with the introduction of enterprise software like SAP, it created the matrix in an organization where you had central control of finance and supply chain, etc. But what was interesting about that is you also created the hybrid organization decades ago. We just didn't know how to work inside of it. In 2010, I was coaching the executive team at Cisco, John Chambers, and he was whispering in my ear about the future of remote work. And I thought, well, there might be something there. And so I started a research study that lasted about 5 years. And it was called, What Are the New People Rules in a Virtual World? Well, what we found was that organizations, and we had over 2,000 organizations in studies trying to document what the best practices were. Organizations spanned a maturity matrix of working in hybrid teams from level 1 to level 5. Now, there were very few level 5s. In fact, what's interesting about this is that at the peak of the pandemic, in 2020. First of all, the pieces that I had written from 2010 to 2018, 18 pieces published in Harvard Business Review, I think we had 5 people reading those pieces. And they were called, What Are the New People Rules in the Virtual World? We show up at the peak of the pandemic and people were interested in the topic. And what we found was that at the peak of the pandemic, even with this great massive inflection point, this opportunity for not just crawling out of the rubble and going back to old ways of working, but instead, we could have leaped out and gone forward to work. What we found was the maturity matrix of world-class hybrid teams, only 5% were at the top of that. Whereas even now at the end of the pandemic, 80% of teams struggle with being world-class hybrid at levels 1 and 2. Now, what does that really mean? So during the pandemic, a lot of people were saying, you know what, we lost connectedness. You remember hearing that? Well, yeah, the organizations that lost connectedness are not the ones that engineered purposeful connectedness into a remote world, but the level 5 organizations actually accelerated connectedness. Simple acts of doing an energy check-in where a team would say to each other on a weekly basis, what is your energy this week? 0 to 5, and why? And have a simple conversation that takes 5 minutes at the team level to touch base into humanity. But that wasn't even existing prior to 2020. In 2019, the average relationship score was 2.8 on a scale of 0 to 5 for most teams. Answering questions, does my team have my back? Right? Do I care about my team and do they care about me? The average team was a 2.8 on a scale of 0 to 5. And yes, that's right. The average team went down to a 2.3 during the pandemic. But not the level 5 teams. The level 5 teams that decided to purposefully re-engineer connectedness in a remote world did things that didn't just count on the serendipitous walk down a hallway or the bump into an individual at the break room, which we're all bemoaning that we've lost, but these individuals leaped forward with progressivism and moved to a 4.7 of relationships. Now that's what was possible. It was also possible in the world of innovation and collaboration. So many organizations said, well, we suffered innovation during the pandemic. Well, that just admits that you're average. Actually, you're not average, you're 80%. Because those organizations that actually purposely re-engineered not just for what we call the collaborative stack, not just for in-person collaboration, but engineering for remote collaboration and realizing that the average meeting, the average in-person meeting of 12 people, only 4 people think that they were heard. Well, if you use the tools of remote meetings and you go to breakout rooms where you can have robust, psychologically safe dialogues, open a Google Doc, have a conversation, come back into the main room. You move up to 10 people out of 12 feeling that they're fully heard. But guess what? Nobody uses the functionality. So we failed to engineer a new way of working in the world of work that we're living in today. We really need to be leveraging the whole collaborative stack. And yet there were some organizations, these level 5 leaders, that did. Drew Houston at Dropbox moved from 10 physical spaces to 30 global neighborhoods, where instead of an office, he had small studios of collaboration space. Dylan from Mindbloom actually eliminated meetings. He said, we're not going to have meetings, they're the enemy. A wonderful little example. The chief operating officer of Delta Airlines moved over to Cruise, and he showed up there in this fast-driving unicorn kind of company. He said, oh, I see a problem. We need to have a meeting on that. They looked at him and said, how do we have a meeting on that? We haven't collaborated yet. Collaboration happens before you force people to get into a room and have a meeting. And Dylan recognized that, reducing meetings by 90%. These individuals are icons, including other folks that I've bumped into. Matt Mullenweg here in the room from WordPress. There's so many other great level 5 leaders like these folks. Other shifts have occurred during the pandemic that we need to pay attention to, that were always there. Shifts of meaning and purpose. Employees will trade 23% of their earnings for meaningful work. They vote with their feet and they join organizations, 45% direct link to the presence of a social connection in their job. And if they don't have it, that's a 39% predictor of their quit rate. This is the world that we need to engineer for today. But let me suggest there's a man who's been doing it for a long time. This man is my inspiration. This man happened to be a very dear friend. And before he passed away, so many of us would sit with him, the CEO of Zappos Shoes. We would sit with him as the weather vane of what's possible and what's the future. His book, Delivering Happiness, showed us all that you can engineer a company with the employee center, not the employee supporting the organization, but the organization supporting the human potential and elevating the human potential of a person. I'll give you a quick for instance. I mean, this is an organization that's an e-commerce company. It's got a call center, right? And in a call center, what do? You minimize call time. Well, that organization, the employees said, no, that feels demoralizing. We want to create meaningful connections with customers who have problems. And so they started to put a blue light next to anyone's cube that was going over 15 minutes. And then with the blue light on, people would rush over. They'd give them a massage. They would give them water. They'd give them food. And they celebrate the fact that this person is building meaningful connection with clients and customers. And as a result of this, they had the highest loyalty in the segment of e-commerce, because the employees decided where they wanted their passions and their meaning to go, which was customer intimacy. Now, once Tony focused on the employee empowerment and unleashing the employee, he started to realize something. He realized that it's not just leadership and individuals, but teamship that he needed to focus on. Look at his org chart. This is a man that awoke to the recognition that once you have an empowered employee, we could redesign the social contract among employees. So why do we need, as a gating item, an autocratic, control-oriented manager who's over top of everyone telling them what to do? Now, Amazon was excited about this because they saw the potential of scale when you have an ecosystem of self-motivated, self-driven, holocratic teams that Tony was driving, and then he even took it to the next step and created marketplaces inside of his organization. But you could see the bellwether of what this man was. He was a weather vane for all of us. When I heard that Tony had passed away, after picking myself up off the floor from a very dear friend's passing, the next day I called Alfred Lin and a number of his other friends, and I said, we can't let his legacy dissipate. His legacy can't just fade into the mist like Camelot. But let's find the other Tonys. Let's build a community of people who may not be anywhere near as aggressive as he is in reinventing or creating that beautiful laboratory, but let's find people who are curious, and let's find people who are interested, and let's find people who are just like you, who are disruptors, but not just disruptors of business models. We want to be disruptors of the human capital models that will meet those business models. See, in our first year, We've had hundreds of entrepreneurs, chief people officers, CEOs of unicorn companies who are deeply interested in cracking this code. And in the second year, we've had thousands. And I get today to share with you the winners of this year's Tony Awards. And by the way, he would have loved using the word Tony Awards, although he would have hated being at the center of it personally. So are we ready to show you a few of the inspiring individuals? Let's do a drum roll. Let's do a drum roll for the first one. There we go. Ready? Drum roll, please. I want to introduce you to Vertical Harvest. Vertical Harvest is an organization that is filled with 50% people who are differently able. And this organization is designed purposefully to take what many people would have considered unemployable or underemployed and fully get the most of these individuals to thrive in their workplace. And have done a beautiful job of it, and they're outstripping the financial returns of their competitors. Ready for another drum roll? Drum roll. Oh yeah, they got a real drum roll. No, I like their drum roll. The next one is Xena. This African collective, Tony was organizing holacratic teams, negotiating in marketplaces with each other. They, by the way, don't even have a CEO. They are a regenerative collective of individuals that are creating value for their customers in small regions and then working with each other to negotiate best practices. Fully holacratic and fully self-governing. Blew us away. Blew us away. By the way, we've had hundreds of hours of judging for this, and you can only imagine being inspired by reading these applications, which we're going to invite you at the end to be a part of this journey, this mission, this movement. Okay, drum roll. There we go. Human bees. Human bees, we heard a lot about technology in this year's applications. Human bees has a passion to make sure that blue-collar workers find purpose in their work. And so what they do is they hire tens of thousands of workers for organizations like Federal Express, but they believe that culture is an algorithm. That if you identify the attributes of fit and engineer to an attribute of fit and put it into an AI engine, that we can actually be predictive. They have a 30% better retention rate than anybody else in their segment. And as a result, Inc. 5000 have identified them last year as the fastest growing company in the United States. And my two gentlemen that I showed you earlier are also Tony Award winners, not just because they are level 5 leaders in hybrid, although that's definitely something that shine, but also because I'm going to talk to you about Dylan. Dylan eliminated the annual performance review simply by having a social contract among everybody that you work with. Every other week, you write them a note. I like ... about our working arrangement, and I wish ... about how it could be better. That includes managers, that includes not org chart, anybody you're working with throughout the entire organization. After a couple of years of those, they decided they don't need any longer to have performance reviews. So here's the call to action. Listen, the world we're living in today is more divisive than ever before. But these leaders are creating co-elevation. They're coaching people to behave in a way that we wish society would behave. They're getting results that are outsized. They're doing practices that we should all learn from. My call to action is that we start disrupting the human capital models just like we're disrupting the business models. That we get ahead of the curve, we join these individuals, and I invite all of you to be among the CEOs, the chief people officers, the thought leaders to go on this journey, and let's make sure this is actually the kind of shoe that Tony wore. The double entendre of Zappos and Zappos shoes wasn't missed on us. Look, the reality is that nobody can fill Tony's shoes, as many of us knew him. But maybe hundreds or thousands of us coming and building a movement in his legacy could begin to approach that.